Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today is a very special day because I am at the Long Beach Convention Center at the IANA Intermodal Expo 2025, and this is the only convention center that gets its own port. And today I got a very special guest also. Today's topic is Long Beach Port of the Future with my friend Dr. Noel Hacegaba. How's it going, Noel?
I'm doing fantastic, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. I keep wanting to call you Noel, but it's Noel.
That's fine. Just don't call me late for dinner.
Exactly. So, Noel, please introduce yourself and your company, where you're normally based.
Sure. So I'm Noel Hacegaba. I serve as the Chief Operating Officer at the Port of Long Beach. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today. One of the great opportunities we have is to host conferences like these. IANA Intermodal Expo is a place to be. It's a place to connect and reconnect with everyone in the supply chain, and could not be happier to be part of this conference and to be your guest.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. A few weeks ago, I interviewed Ann Reinke, who's the CEO and president of IANA. That's Intermodal Association North America, which has been around for a long time, but it flies under the radar. It's a fantastic organization. I will make sure we put links to that in the show notes, along with Noel's LinkedIn and his company website and all that. But when I interviewed Ann, right after we hung up, I said, I would like to interview, when we go out to Long Beach, I would love to interview someone from the port. And I couldn't even get it out of my mouth before she said, Noel, you got to talk to Noel. And then right then she sent an email to you, an email to me saying, let's do it. And I was like, so thank you so much. And so Ann thinks really highly of you, and apparently used to sit on the board of IANA.
I did, and by the way, the feeling is mutual. I'm a huge fan of Ann's, and I did have the privilege of serving on the IANA Board of Directors. I served a couple terms as chairman. Fantastic organization, and happy to continue to support it in any way I can.
Good. So I got a lot of questions, and I feel the ports, Long Beach being one of the major ports, a lot of the supply chain community, we're all completely dependent on, but a lot of people go, I pick up at the port, so I'm an expert at the port. I think they all have kind of unique personalities, and I think they are all a little different. There's a difference between a container port and a tanker port, and I think most of the people in supply chain, I'll say myself included, don't know enough about the ports. So I'm going to ask some very basic questions as we go. But first, tell us a little bit about the Port of Long Beach, which is right out the back window from us.
Sure. So first of all, there's an old saying within our industry, the Port Authority sector, and that is, if you've seen a port, you've seen a port, because they're so different. Each port can claim different criteria, different attributes that make it unique. And I like to say that before the pandemic, ports were invisible. No one really thought about ports. They didn't care about ports until the pandemic hit. And when folks went to the stores to buy their products and the store shelves were bare, and they went to the appliance store to buy an appliance, and they were told that, you're gonna have to wait 6 months. It's stuck somewhere on a ship at the port. All of a sudden, it thrust ports like ours into the spotlight. So we went from being invisible to being infamous. It was our fault that folks weren't being able to get their goods. And then all of a sudden we became important. So I think the conversation has changed. I think these days, folks are more in tune with what supply chain is, goods movement is, and the critical role of ports. So here in Long Beach, Joe, we are the nation's second busiest seaport. And together with our neighbor, the Port of Los Angeles, we make up America's largest gateway. Approximately 40% of all of America's imports come in through our ports. And all the containers that cross our docks on an annual basis, which is about 9.6 million TEUs, reach all 435 congressional districts.
I always say to people like my kids' age, but I think even people, my peers who are getting older, they don't recognize that we've lived through a cheap revolution and cheap goods. Stuff that was very expensive for my parents' and grandparents' generation is very inexpensive. People use the term fast fashion, and I know it's not as necessarily sustainable, but you can buy very inexpensive stuff. Stuff got very cheap, and one of the main reasons things got very cheap is because we were able to produce in Asia, mostly China, and ship it via containers usually, very inexpensively per unit, almost free when you look at the unit cost per sweater, per whatever. And I don't think people realize without those containers, which, by the way, the table we're sitting at no doubt came in a container. All of these brackets came from somewhere else. Now, I know we will be doing more manufacturing in the U.S., but we first have to recognize we are sitting on a foundation that the ports and the ocean shipping world and the manufacturing in Asia built for us or with us.
Yeah, and that's a great observation. It's decades in the making, right? Our reliance on other countries to manufacture most of the goods that we consume is something that shipping and intermodal enables. And when you think about the fact that 90% of all imports arrive here on a ship because it's more economical, it's more cost effective, the economies of scale are superior. And intermodal, by the way, connects that ship to a train and to a truck, and it makes sure that those intermodal connections bring that container all the way to its destination.
Just for people who don't do it every day, what is intermodal?
Yes, sir. Intermodal is the connection between different modes in the supply chain, right? It's the voyage of a container that gets from a ship to a port terminal like what we have here in Long Beach, on a train that reaches all the key inland rail markets, or on a truck, whether it's a short dray or a long dray over the road voyage. It's about leveraging the different modes of transportation to get the container to its destination more quickly, more cost effectively, and more sustainably.
Yep. I remember this when I was still doing logistics day to day. So, yeah, they'll clear customs in Chicago. I was like, what? And I think it came here, got on a train, and then made it all the way to Chicago, and then cleared customs. And you go, how did that even happen? But it's gotten very efficient. And I talked to the Greater Phoenix Economic Growth Council, and they said, oh, we're a hub for Port of Long Beach, Port of LA. I was like, you're in the desert, man. They're on the ocean. But that's the nature of these complex supply chains that is the backbone of our economy.
And it's fascinating when you think about that because, again, for most people, the supply chain is invisible. We are trucks, trains, you hear them. And it's rare that you actually see a port unless you live in a city that has one. But intermodal is that connectivity between the different modes that makes that voyage of that container more efficient, cost-effective, and sustainable.
Tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you joined the juggernaut that is Port of Long Beach.
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California in a small city called Baldwin Park that is now famous today for being the original location of the very first In-N-Out hamburger.
Oh, nice.
And so I'm sure your listeners, your audience are familiar with In-N-Out. And I went to college at the University of Southern California, the other USC, and did my undergraduate studies in business and economics and stayed on to do a couple of master's degrees in economics, urban planning. And then I dabbled in public affairs, a fellowship.
You got a doctor in front of your name, so you must have gotten a PhD somewhere along the line.
Yeah, so after I received my master's degrees, I went to work for about 6 years. And during that time, I enrolled in a doctoral program for working professionals. We call them scholarly practitioners. And I earned my doctorate in public administration from the University of Laverne.
Very nice, very nice.
I'll tell you a funny story. During the pandemic and the supply chain crisis, one of the supply chain envoys asked me, we were just chit-chatting before our meeting, and he says, hey, Noel, he says, what did you get your doctorate in? I said, I got it in public administration, but if I knew I was going to end up in this industry, I probably should have gotten it in psychology.
Exactly, especially during the pandemic where, and by the way, I say this all the time, pandemic on a personal level, horrible. Very good for business for a lot of logistics companies. I must imagine it was a nightmare here because the eyes of the world were on the ports and what they weren't doing. But here's the thing. People have been on my podcast sometimes say COVID-19 or 20, meaning I gained 19 or 20 pounds. It's the only pandemic in history where people said, oh, I gained weight. Nobody starved to death. There was, again, on a personal level, it was very difficult, but our supply chains turned out, they were a little brittle here and there, but they worked. They still worked. No one went out, for the most part, no one went out without food. In fact, there was way too much food at my house.
It's interesting, right? Because it seems like it happened so long ago, but it was just a few years ago, Joe, when we had 109 ships at anchor just outside our harbor. And the supply chain was really in crisis. But again, we learned to come together. That's one thing about our supply chain and intermodal, right? We know how to come together. We know how to get the job done. And even in these unprecedented extreme circumstances, for example, our ILW dock workers, they showed up to work. They masked up. They didn't miss a single shift because we all recognized how critical we are to the national economy.
Yeah, and it's funny when you hear people go, yeah, I can't work. I can't work because of COVID this. I can't be in public because of COVID. And I was like, well, the truck drivers got to work today. The guys at the port got to, the guys who unload those trucks got there. And somehow the people who were, and by the way, there's a lot of people who deserve credit for helping us through that. But sometimes we overlook. And by the way, speaking of overlook, I talked to Ann Ranke yesterday about this. I said, IANA is so important because I feel like intermodal and rail get overlooked. It is not just the backbone of the supply chain, it's the backbone of our economy, and it gets short notice. I think about all the business classes I took. I don't remember too much about ports. I don't remember too much about railroads. And Ann said the railroad's 200 years old. Maybe they stopped touting why they're so good a long time ago. Anyway, big things going on over at... Oh, by the way, I didn't let you finish your story. So how did you end up? I know you started about your academic career. Give me some career highlights before you ended up at Port of Long Beach.
Sure. So I had no ambition, or I was like most people in the general public, no clue about ports.
And you're a Southern California guy.
And I was a Southern California guy. At the time I was living in Long Beach. I was working for the city. And I knew we had a port, and I had toured the port. But I left the city to go work in the private sector, Fortune 500 company. And one of the cities that was in my portfolio was the city of Long Beach. So I started attending a bunch of different events here in Long Beach. And one of them was called the State of the Port. So I bought my ticket online. I showed up the day of the event. I checked in at the table and got my seating assignment. I went to the table, Joe, I was assigned to. Every seat was taken. So either someone jacked my seat or someone made a mistake with my seating assignment. But at that point, I said, it's all right, I'll just look for another table. At that point, the program was about to start, and the only table with available seats was the one furthest away from the podium next to the exit door. So I said, this is perfect. I can sneak out a little early if I have to. I sit down, and the person sitting right next to me, turns out, was the Director of Human Resources for the Port of Long Beach. So we chatted for about 5-6 minutes, exchanged business cards. Very pleasant conversation. I excused myself. 2 weeks later in the mail, I received the job bulletin for what eventually became my first job at the port. And I tell the story because, and that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about exposing our youth to our industry, making sure they're aware from a young age the wonderful career opportunities that intermodal, supply chain, goods movement offers them. I'll tell you what, when I was in college, there was no major in supply chain. No. There was no talk. You know what they used to call it? It was an emphasis. It wasn't a major or even a minor. It was an emphasis in the business program. It was called distribution management.
Yeah, it was sometimes called logistics. Where I'm from, Michigan State had a program called logistics and procurement or something like that. And I remember I worked in automotive, which is our biggest, baddest supply chain on earth. And we didn't have supply chain when I started. And I always remember getting an offer, somebody calling me up and saying, hey, I'd love to get a supply chain guy like you. And I was like, I'm working in engineering. What are you talking about? But anyway, yeah, it's a newer thing. That's how you end up at Port.
So that's how I ended up at the port. I've had 4 different roles at the port. I've been here 15 years. Very blessed to have this opportunity. And currently, as a chief operating officer, I oversee the day-to-day operations and administration, everything from commercial operations to human resources to environmental planning to strategic advocacy and finance admin. It's a fascinating job.
Yep. And by the way, today's topic, Long Beach, Port of the Future. Before we hit the record button, we talked a little bit about some of the things going on in this whole industry. When I say industry, all the people here at IANA, everyone kind of says the same thing. Not in the same words. We need to glow up in this space. People need to know more about what we're doing. They might be old businesses, but that doesn't mean they're not improving day to day. So I wrote a few points down that I want to talk to you about. Sure. Number one was capital infrastructure. You guys are spending a lot of money. By the way, if you haven't been to the ports, go on YouTube, take a look. I'll look for a YouTube video we'll put in the show notes. you don't have the sense for the scale unless, I mean, it's a city, not a dock.
That's right. It does resemble a little city when you're there up close.
Yeah. So tell us about the capital infrastructure program you guys got going.
So one of the ways that we're leading the port industry is with our largest and most aggressive CapEx program of any port authority in North America, possibly the world. Over the last 15 years, Joe, we've invested over $5 billion. Over the next 10 years, we're going to invest another $3.2 billion on top of that. Now, what are we doing? We're upgrading our infrastructure. We just delivered a brand new bridge that enables larger ships to transit underneath it to access our back channel. It widens the lanes so that to enable more trucks and more commuter cars to safely and more securely transit on it. We're also expanding our rail capacity. You talked about the importance of rail and intermodal and the connection between ships and trains. That happens here at the port. In fact, 2/3 of our containers that arrive here in Long Beach end up somewhere else east of the Mississippi. And that's where the trains come in. So think about this. As we build out our rail infrastructure inside the Port of Long Beach, our Class 1 partners are investing themselves in their yards and in their networks. So it creates these synergies and this force multiplier.
And I think I say this all the time regarding rail, so overlooked, just like the ports. They build their rail, so they're not waiting for highways to be built. And so this isn't a government program. They build their own rail. And I think also every time a rail with 300 cars, those are trucks that don't have to be on the road. It's cleaner and greener. And for the right product, it's got to be high volume. It's got to go a long way. It's a fantastic mode. Sometimes overlooked. I feel like the railroad guys are a little invisible sometimes. I think they know who their customers are and they speak to their customers. And I've had them on the podcast every once in a while, but their appearances are dwarfed by the rest of the people I talk to in the trucking space.
It's like you said, when you think about the critical role that the railroads play in moving goods from the West Coast to the East Coast and vice versa, they really are the backbone. And it's just that a lot of people don't see it because a lot of these tracks are not necessarily next to roads or in communities. So very important.
So this capital infrastructure basically is you guys are getting bigger, better. And one other thing.
And we're getting greener too.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the next point I wrote down is sustainability. I think everybody who does drayage here, anybody who delivers here recognizes that there is a higher standard in California. And I think people think, oh, that's one of the woo, they're green. It's different here because their weather's different. You end up with smog. I'm in the Midwest. We don't have a smog problem. So if we have congested traffic, it's not as big a deal. The ports, it is a big deal. And I think the stuff we learn in California often is applied elsewhere later. We all want a cleaner and greener solution. But sustainability is super important. I'm speaking just right now of the trucks. But and by the way, right behind you, I'm looking at IMC. I'm interviewing them later today. IMC's got a nice electric vehicle here that's for drayage. And somebody said to me, yeah, the Trump administration's de-emphasized that. And to the relief of a lot of trucking companies. And I say this all the time. It doesn't matter who's in office. The biggest brands want sustainability. And I call California a brand. California wants sustainability. So we're going to get there. It's not overnight, but companies like IMC made a big investment in a beautiful drayage truck out there.
And they're a terrific partner. They're the ones who are helping us lead the way on environmental sustainability. But let me say this, Joe. This is not something we just came up with last year. We are 20 years in this journey. In fact, 2025 marks the 20th anniversary of our groundbreaking green port policy. The Port of Long Beach was the very first green port. And it was a bold declaration that our Board of Harbor Commissioners made at that time without really knowing fully what a green port was or how we were going to get there. But let me share these stats with you that your viewers are just going to be blown away by. In these 20 years, we've, with the help of all of our partners, the ships, the trucks, the trains, our terminals, we've managed to reduce every category of emission. Diesel particulate matter, 92%. NOx, 71%. SOx, 98%. Greenhouse gases, 17%. And check this out. During the very same time period that our volumes have grown over 20%. So we are an example that you can grow green. And as we continue to build out our infrastructure, not only are we building for capacity and scale and resilience and safety, we're building for sustainability. And that's why we're so excited about what we're doing. And this is why we call it the port of the future. We're building this future to last another 100 years.
I'm assuming some of that capital infrastructure money is being spent on sustainability.
Absolutely.
So you're going to be cleaner, greener, and more efficient.
Yes. And again, with the help of all of our partners, you pointed out IMC, and everyone else is coming to the table and contributing to this effort.
Yep. Before we hit the record button, I was talking to you about Sal Mercogliano. He does a wonderful YouTube channel, and it blew up during COVID. He started during COVID. I think it was originally called What's Going On with the Evergrande, which was the Evergrande ship was stuck in the Suez Canal.
Oh, yeah.
And one of his viewers said, there's a whole bunch of other boats in the ocean. Why don't you talk about those? And he did, and thank God, because it's the #1 YouTube channel for ocean shipping. But he said, all the ports here are a hodgepodge of government-owned and sometimes managed by private organizations. And he said each one has a different personality. So please talk about that for just a minute.
Here in the United States, there are different models for port authorities. Here in California, the predominant model is what we call the landlord port, where we basically develop land and we enter into these long-term leases with private companies who in turn run the terminals. And by the way, these port authorities in California are governed by the cities. So we are literally, in most cases, departments of the city. In our case, we are a department. We are the harbor department of the city of Long Beach. But our moniker, our brand, we're known internationally as the Port of Long Beach. LA is a similar situation. But then you go to states like Georgia or South Carolina, you have state ports authorities, where it's the state that governs the ports there and the operations, and they're also operating ports, which means that the port authority actually also runs the operations. They hire the labor and so forth.
And I think what else people don't recognize, I think we're starting to recognize, I think we see some, what was I thinking, Savannah.
Yes.
The ports are often the engine for growth for not for the city, for the region.
And even here, Joe, it's a great opportunity for me to talk about the reason we tout how big we are. It's not just the number of containers. Just think about this. The Port of Long Beach alone, each year, we handle over $300 billion worth of goods. We generate over 2.7 million jobs across the nation, 700,000 jobs regionally. And as I said earlier, every container, all the containers that cross our docks on an annual basis here in Long Beach, they ultimately reach all 435 congressional districts. So we are a public asset of national significance. And I think that's important to know.
Yes, absolutely. So you mentioned Port of Los Angeles, and I joke about this, that we know so little. I say supply chain people know so little about the way these ports work. So there's Port of Long Beach, and then there's a whole separate port right next door, Port of Los Angeles. Please talk about that. Why two ports side by side?
That was something that was determined and decided decades ago.
Your decision?
Not my decision. If you look at a map, you'll see two ports that are literally side to side. They're contiguous, right? You've got the Port of Los Angeles on the west, the Port of Long Beach on the east, and there are political boundaries that separate us. And these boundaries are boundaries that determine the jurisdiction under which city they reside. So as I said earlier, the Port of Long Beach is a department of the city of Long Beach, just like the Port of Los Angeles is a department of the city of Los Angeles. But because we're so close, Joe, we collaborate when it comes to environmental sustainability, when it comes to security. It just makes more sense for us to be in sync, to collaborate and coordinate, and we do. When it comes to cargo and commercial matters, we compete for cargo. But again, most of the world sees us as one complex. That's why we're also known together as a San Pedro Bay Ports Complex.
So you compete when you're supposed to, and you collaborate when you're supposed to.
And that's been a hallmark of our success, and we value the relationship we have with the Port of Los Angeles.
I think that's the way the whole industry works. I told you before we hit the record button, there was cybersecurity attacks throughout the industry, and I've heard people say, so-and-so, describe their competition, saved us. And I think most people realize we need all the players. We could use some trucking companies probably have too many trucks. We can shed some of those to get the demand up a little more, but generally speaking, we don't need all hands on deck.
Yeah, we're better together. And I like what John Maxwell says, that teamwork makes the dream work. And I think that applies to intermodal as well.
So another thing I put on my list to talk to you about is workforce development. Talk about that.
So as we build out the infrastructure that we think we're going to need for the future, we build out our capacity, we inject resilience and sustainability, we're also investing in our digital infrastructure. Our supply chain information highway, Joe, for example, is a digital tool that unleashes the power of data sharing to maximize visibility, reliability, and value for all of our partners, the ships, the trucks, the trains, and everyone in between. And I say that because as we build all this infrastructure out, the digital, the physical, we also need to make sure that we are training, preparing, and equipping our workforce. Someone is going to have to operate all these pieces of equipment. Someone's going to have to manage these digital platforms. And so one of the other areas where the Port of Long Beach is a leader is in the space of workforce development. We have now 3 different programs in partnership with Long Beach Unified School District, California State University, Long Beach, Joe, where we are basically creating a pipeline where we are attracting youth as young as high school to careers in supply chain.
Absolutely necessary. And I tell you, I think there's been a lot of discussion in recent years. Does everyone need to go to college? For a while, everyone needs to go to college. You need a degree. And now as the young people are, and by the way, and their parents are saddled with student loan debt because they wanted to get in the very best schools. And after a while you go, not all of it was necessary. Not everyone needs to go to school to get in the supply chain. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there. And by the way, there's another challenge besides the cost of traditional education is there's fewer children being born. And we're going to have to get more efficient. We're going to have to use robotics. We're going to have to do a lot of things, automation. But I think we also have to start attracting. If you say, hey, welcome to the port, this is manual labor, and you're going to be sore and tired and dirty when you go home every night, that's not a good pitch. You have to be able to say, hey, this is a great job. Let me show you a future that you could have if you work here. We're going to have to start making those pitches. By the way, I'm the tail end of the baby boomers. And I always remember the idea that you would say to the boss, hey, I don't think this is a good place to work. I don't like the culture here. I'd probably get physically beaten. And I worked in engineering. And I always think to myself is, young people often talk, I want good work-life balance. I want to move up. And I think you can say, they're just spoiled. I'm a baby boomer. We were the spoiled generation not so long ago. So we have to start doing a better job of promoting this industry. We need a glow up, Noel.
We need to make sure that our youth, our children, right, understand the terrific career opportunities that our industry offers them so that when they go to college, they pursue careers and degrees in supply chain and logistics. And let me say this also about workforce development, right? Because I know technology is emerging, it's evolving, but we can never keep our eyes off of the humans. I think that technology makes the human more productive and it enables them to do more. But we can never replace the human, right? The human is at the center of our supply chain. It's the people who operate the pieces of equipment, who operate the trucks, the trains, the vessels. But going back to your point about the different generations or the different cohorts in the workplace, talk to any HR professional, they'll tell you this is probably the most complex time because you have so many different generations in the workplace that have different values, they have different mindsets.
Yeah, and you have to accommodate all. And by the way, I say this often on my podcast. I think, 100 years ago, somewhere along the line, somebody said we work 40 hours a week and we work 52 weeks a year. And some of us end up working 50, 60 hours if you're ambitious. I think we're going to see some people, especially like baby boomers like myself, who you say, hey, we'd love you to stick around. But he or she might say, yeah, I'm willing to do it 40 weeks a year. Or I'm willing to do it 25 hours a week. And I think we're going to have to, by the way, we should accommodate it. And I think new parents are oftentimes going to say, hey, I would love to keep my career, but can you work with me? Can you let me be a parent and also be an employee here? And I think we're going to have to find ways not only just to recruit, we got to retain these people. And I think we're also, wealthy country. And so there's going to be some number of people who say, I don't have to work. Mom or dad left me some money, or my husband makes enough, my wife makes enough. I don't have to work. And I think we could see a lot of that challenge. I know people are probably listening and saying, what do you mean we're that wealthy? There's, I think it's 7 million males who are working age who are not working and not looking. That's a brand new figure. We never had that in the past.
That's a big chunk of the workforce. I think that, like you said, it is a complex environment now, but I think if we get people excited about our industry enough,
Yes.
like you said, if we attract them, if we motivate them, if we say, hey, look, this is, and here's the other thing I've noticed too, Joe, which is interesting. I've seen people start in one end of the supply chain and they migrate to another. And
Yes.
I'm seeing more and more of that. And I think that's wonderful. You know why? Because it takes every segment outside its silos. I like to say that as a Port Authority guy, we have to think outside the docks, right? We have to
Yes.
think about the ships. We have to think about the port of origin, yes, but we also have to think about the trucks and the trains and the chassis,
Right.
the warehouses, because you have to have this holistic view. So I think if we work together as an industry, and IANA does a phenomenal job of this, is getting people excited about what we do and how we contribute to the economy, how we contribute to our nation, and get these young people, brilliant minds into
When you mentioned that workforce development, one of the things I thought about is a lot of times people who start off, maybe they're driving a truck or unloading stuff on a dock, and it's just manual labor, and there's no career path. And they say, oh no, that job with the office, the manager's job, we're going to hire a kid out of college for that. I think we got to get to a place where we say, yeah, you can start here and we'll help you. We'll show you a career path, because there's no reason that somebody who's started on the floor can't end up at the top. And I talked to one of the guys from the railroad. He says, I started as an engineer and I'm the president of a rail company. And I think we got to get back to that. We somewhere along the line said, oh, this manual labor class, this is the blue collar class. And the college kids show up at 22, 24 years old, and they're somehow got the better job than the guy who's been at your company for 5 years.
Yeah, succession planning or creating those paths for folks to come in entry level and move their way. Mary Barra from GM, for example,
Yes.
right? You've got the incoming CEO of Target. These are folks who have dedicated their entire careers to a company, and to their credit, they've been able to move up, and their companies created those paths. Yeah.
Right. And we need to do that. So much to talk about the tariffs in the last few years. And a friend of mine said, oh boy, you're going out to the ports. It's yesterday's news. We're going to make everything here. I was like, dude, what are you, nuts? I said, it's so much more complex than that. But I know there is a push from the Trump, and by the way, it's not going to be just the Trump administration. We had the CHIPS Act under Biden, which was, let's bring some chip production home. I think that we look at some of this as security. Some of it is let's have good jobs for Americans. How do you guys view the tariffs and how it impacts what you guys do at the ports?
For us, currently, China by itself accounts for about 60% of all of our total container volumes. That's a huge number. And back in 2018, 2019, when we went through the first round of tariffs, we were disproportionately impacted because of our heavy reliance on China. That percentage, by the way, Joe, China's market share in our business, it dropped from 70% to 60%. And that 10% point swing shifted manufacturing to Southeast Asia. So Vietnam, for example, is now a bigger player for us, a bigger trade partner. Other countries in Southeast Asia that are emerging, right? And so you see that shift, and it's only accelerating. To your point about bringing jobs home, we're all for American jobs. We'd love to see more manufacturing. We love to see more Americans make things that we consume. But when you think about how we got here, okay, we are decades in the making. Outsourcing manufacturing to China and other parts in Asia, that's decades in the making.
That's my job.
So how do you undo or how do you reverse a trend that's decades in the making? And by the way, let me say something else about manufacturing. When you talk about manufacturing in the future, you see these images of factories from the 1940s, 1950s. That's not what we're talking about at all. Advanced manufacturing is so different, whether it's shipbuilding, whether it's whatever, you name it. It's more sophisticated. It's a different environment altogether.
We talked earlier, there's fewer young people. It's going to be hard to go convince your son or daughter, say, hey, it'd be great if you could go work in that factory. And again, when I started my career many moons ago, I would walk through an automotive factory, and the people doing the work were dirty, sweaty, working so hard that when they went home at the end of the night, they were tired, sometimes injured. Sometimes they were getting injured because they were crouching or standing on their tiptoes. Short-term injuries, but also long-term injuries. By the time I left automotive 15 years ago, you walk through the same facility and nobody is standing on their tiptoes. Nobody's lifting anything heavy. Nobody's walking out of that facility dirty, sweaty, and exhausted. So I'm not saying it's not hard work, but it's not dangerous hard work. And
it's a different job.
yes, so we're gonna have to think a lot long and hard about this. And so I know that stuff is shifting. When we said we were going global and we're going to move outsource stuff, basically outsource it mainly to China. And I think my hope is that we continue to have a good relationship with China. I always say we're frenemies. We need to trade with them. If goods don't cross borders, armies do. So we need to continue to work with China. But I do think anything that is key to our national security is probably moving back here. But that doesn't mean that everything's moving back here. And I think supply chains are very complex. Certain countries do certain things better. Some things are going to be done in Mexico. Some things will be done here. It's a big world. And I think we like the idea of good career jobs coming back here, but it's not going to be everything. And again, I do believe we need to continue trading. And by the way, all the countries we don't trade with, we're afraid of. They're afraid of us for good reason. You don't bomb your allies. You don't bomb the people who you do business with. So we need to continue that approach.
And I think it's important to recognize the value of trade for our economy as a nation, right? Goods movement is literally the economy in motion. Think about how many businesses are supported by trade, how many jobs. Port of Long Beach alone, we create over 2.7 million jobs across the nation. So there's an enormous value in the supply chain and the trade, all the economic activity that trade enables.
I love it. So I'm going to try and wrap this bad boy up. We covered a lot of ground here. I'm going to try and summarize what we talked about, then I want to get your final thoughts on the topic. So I'm talking to my friend, Dr. Noel Hacegaba, and today's topic is Long Beach, Port of the Future. So we talked about the importance of the port. We talked throughout the whole conversation. And even in this new economy where we're bringing all the jobs home, more important than ever that the ports operate safely, efficiently, effectively, and sustainability is still going to be very key. And I think California is the leader. When we talk about sustainability, you guys have a bigger problem than a lot of. You have absolutely beautiful weather, but that beautiful weather comes with smog that we don't see for the rest of the country. So there is a higher bar when it comes to emissions, and that is pushing the whole industry. And again, we both walked by the IMC electric vehicle. Everyone was told, hey, you're going to get cleaner and greener with these drayage vehicles. By the way, we didn't talk about it, but drayage vehicles traditionally are a little older because they're driving local a lot of times. And that means they weren't as good with emissions. So California had good reason to say, why are all the old trucks driving around in our neighborhood? We're going to get more sustainable. We talked a lot about workforce development. We have to convince the young people in this country, and perhaps their parents, that there is a great career in the supply chain, and there are great jobs at the port and surrounding the ports. And I think people go, oh, I don't want to unload boxcars. I don't want to use a crane. You said millions and millions of jobs developed by this. And so you might say, yeah, I work with the port, but I never touch a box. I see them go by, but I don't touch them. So many opportunities. And by the way, I think there's just going to be more. I don't think there's going to be fewer opportunities. There's going to be more. And last but not least, we did talk about the tariffs. I think the tariffs have changed your business, clearly. It's changed everybody's business. We've all had to think twice. I like to think that we're heading in the right direction. Who knows? That's not my job. That's above my pay grade. Anyway, Noel, put a big old bow on this one. Final thoughts on the topic.
At the Port of Long Beach, we are literally building the port of the future. And we are anticipating emerging trends, challenges, in trying to do our part to make intermodal, make the entire goods movement, transportation system more efficient, more resilient, more reliable, and more sustainable.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.
I really love what you guys are doing. And I'm so happy for myself and everyone here. I don't think we have enough conferences at the port. Thank you, Ayanna, for that.
Yes.
And thank you for Port of Long Beach for hosting all of us and having in your home.
Our pleasure. And thank you, Joe. Enjoy the rest of your stay.
Thanks, Noel. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward.
You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.